welcome to today's masterclass brought to you by the Monaco Streaming Film Festival. I'm your host, Gavin, the Senior Media Analyst at Variety's Variety Intelligence Platform Service, and I'm joined today by Valeria Dominguez. We're going to be discussing creating content that crosses borders. Now, Valeria is the Director of Development at ThinkBIG Productions, and she actually was selected as a fellow for the NALIP Producers Pipeline. So she's a pretty distinguished up-and-comer in the world of production and studios. And so welcome, Valeria.
Hi, Gavin. How are you today? Thank you so much for having me on, and also to the Monaco International Film Festival as well. Really excited to be here, with them, as I know their festival is approaching here in May this year. So thank you so much.
So I guess let's begin with, let's just learn a little about you and your background, because I think it's very important for the topic we're discussing.
Yeah. That's a good place to start. So I'm Valeria, and I think my background, I guess I'll start with that. So I was born in Mexico City, but I grew up in Houston, Texas, and grew up there. But currently, I am Director of Development at ThinkBIG Productions, like you mentioned, where I recently launched the company's first development slate of original scripted as well as unscripted content. And like you mentioned as well, NALIP, the Producers Incubator Program. So what they're striving to do is to sort of find and pinpoint maybe the next generation of Latin producers and up-and-comers, and really guide us through and help us find that sort of niche into what we want to do, which is essentially, pursuing IP, finding projects, and really pushing those forward for specific audiences. But I think that's a little bit of my background. I am fluent in English and Spanish, and so that's a little bit about me and what I'm currently doing now. So
what are you working on right now? I know you mentioned putting together the first production slate. Anything interesting is going on?
Yes. So right now at ThinkBIG, we have two sides to our slate. So we have unscripted and scripted. In unscripted, we have some really exciting docuseries content. It's a lot in the likes of Cheer, which is on Netflix. And you can think about sort of sports cinematic documentaries. And we're working with a sport that's going into the Olympics in 2024. That's brand new. And so following athlete stories and try to find inspiration that's there in real life. And then for scripted, which is what we're talking about today, we have a slate of projects for the U.S. Hispanic Latin American audience. So we have a lot of incredible content that's scripted series and features, and we're working with different writers from different backgrounds. And our content is essentially bilingual, so it's like English and Spanish, and it's sort of for the audience that maybe lives in two places at once. So we are working on some really, really exciting projects on that end as well.
Well, actually, so it sounds great. And the next question I had for you is, you kind of answered it, I think, in a little bit. Like, why are you interested in developing multicultural content? Because it's the way you described it at the end about living in two places. And I think with your background, that perhaps is kind of what you're experiencing, right? Like you grew up in one country, but you were born in another, and you're developing content that could work in both the countries you have links with. Is there anything else behind your interest in multicultural content?
Yeah, I think why I'm interested and sort of have, the goal to develop, and ThinkBIG Production stands behind that goal, to develop content, like you're saying, that crosses borders or for multicultural audiences, is because when I look at the slate of content that we've spent, the last year or 2 years building, I see content from a writer who's from Mexico City, and, she's written an incredible show. Then there's a writer from the Dominican Republic who also spent some time in Miami. And so his stories are these really unique characters that I've never seen before. But then we also have something from a writer who is Mexican-American, or like third generation Mexican-American, who maybe doesn't speak Spanish as much as her parents do, but, she's here, but yet still wanting to be rooted to her culture. And so when I look at this slate of content and kind of who it's coming from, I kind of take a step back and think, wow, like there are so many different perspectives, like that is, the Latin content and where these stories come from. And I think we're just now sort of tapping the surface into what we've still yet to see on streaming platforms, right? Or on content that reaches mass audiences. And so I think that's why. And then also my background, I have to say, is like, growing up in Houston, but being from Mexico City, I was really lucky where my home country was only 2 hours away by plane. So I really was able to live sort of my youth, summers and, school back and forth and have family in one place, but family in another, and genuinely feel like I lived in two places at once. Like I could be talking in Spanish and then 2 hours later, I'll just be with my, friends in the US. And so it's sort of this, like content that I think some people do think or speak in two languages and maybe like, pushing forward, what we can create for that audience and maybe why it matters and things like that.
Yeah, I think especially in the US, you think with the number of people who were raised in this country speaking Spanish at home and then learning English and speaking Spanish outside, perhaps still speaking it to elderly relatives, it's a very interesting dynamic that I don't know if the scale exists in other countries. You obviously everywhere has an immigration population, but here it's just a really big swath of people. And you actually touched on something very interesting with what you were saying, I thought too, because, my background here was in entertainment market research before I joined Variety. And one of the things I always found is whenever someone releases findings, it's always like, oh, let's talk about the Hispanic market as a one homogenous group. But it sort of ignores the fact, which you touched on, that if you're from the Dominican Republic, you probably have very different experiences and culture and stories to someone who's from El Salvador, right? But I think as a entertainment kind of perspective, they tend to just push it all together and have done really before. It's like we have a Hispanic show rather than we have a show that kind of talks about different facets of the content. So I think what you're doing is a very interesting model, and I know from firsthand experience that there'll be people out there who'll be very interested to see, their stories represented.
Yeah, I think there are, I don't know the exact number, so I'm not going to say it, but I know there's, millions of Spanish speakers. There's a millions of global Spanish speaking audience. And those are, different types of audiences. So it's just really fascinating, like film and what we all do comes back to story. And so it's thinking through where do these stories come from and who's going to watch it and why are they going to watch it? And when it comes to premium content, right, that's really like what's sort of new or like revolutionary is giving these global audiences like this premium content that maybe they've never had before. So, yeah.
That's a really good point. And I guess that leads me to the next question of, is there anything out there that's catching your attention? Perhaps premium, the rise of premium but is there anything that, in terms of content that is really grabbing you at the moment?
Yes. Well, there's a lot, and it's not just the Latin content. Obviously, like I'm watching The Dropout on Hulu, We Crash on Apple TV Plus. There's some incredible shows that are coming out right now. But going back to this like premium content for the audiences that we're talking about, there was a show that came out recently that was called Who Killed Sarah on Netflix. So yeah, that one for sure caught my eye because of sort of what it did, which was mix a telenovela and a premium content show all at once. And I've never seen anything done like that before. So there's so much across, all different perspectives that I'm watching.
Do you see then like a world with more creativity and output for Latin content? Because I think what you said there, Who Killed Sarah, is interesting because I'm guessing prior to that, telenovelas were just telenovelas, right? There really wasn't a change to the format. Is there a kind of an injection of creativity now for Spanish speaking content?
Yeah. So Who Killed Sarah was really interesting because it's that like traditional telenovela model. The actors that were in it were actually from like soap operas. They're kind of like well-known soap opera actors in Mexico. And they sort of took them and took like a family story where the drama has to do with like, the father keeping his family safe. But they put like that premium content look and feel and sort of that 10 episodes, right? Versus telenovelas are typically like 50 or they just keep going hundreds of episodes. And I think that kind of says there's this new way for us now to approach traditionally, a place like Mexico makes telenovelas and is really, really successful in that and has been for decades. But now it's maybe, okay, this telenovela audience, does it want something else? Does it want something more than the telenovela? You have to compete with what's premium. And so I think that's a really interesting example of how they've been able to combine it. So I think there is more creativity and output, with what are we going to create next? And I think this is like a really great example. Yeah.
Well, I think hand in hand with that is a thing that you told me when we were discussing before about how premium content has really only taken off in the last, say, like 5 years in Mexico in particular. What is behind the sudden increase in premium productions?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And maybe you can also help me answer it because, right, you also know a lot about the streaming services more than you're kind of the expert here when it comes to that. But I think for me, I always pinpoint, like there was this one show that I think really launched it. And I want to say that's for like the Mexico audience as well. It's just like Latin, Spanish language. So in 2015, there was a show that was a Netflix original series, and it was called Club de Cuervos, or I think it's Club of Crows in English. And that was Netflix's first original Spanish language series. So for a platform like Netflix to say, we're going to make a Spanish language series and it's going to be an original Netflix series. And that was the first one. And then for audiences to see it, but also I think for, creators like producers and writers and directors, and for people to see that, it was like, whoa, there's a change, there's a shift, and what's going to happen. And that was in 2015. So I think that I don't know if that was the first, one, but I think that was the one that started it, at least for Netflix, and maybe the other platforms followed. And so I also think it's because, you kind of have to compete with, what is being put out in other places, right? Like Europe or the US, and also give the Spanish language audiences that same premium content. And people just loved that show. I remember it's like either family and friends. So this Club de Cuervos was it was a comedy about a family that owns and is running a professional soccer team. So like you can't get any more Mexican than that. So it was just like really funny and people just loved it. I think they felt like finally, like I'm watching a show that was like made for me and has comedy that I understand and is, takes place in in soccer and in this like sort of sport that people love. And so I think audiences just loved it so much. And I'm sure that's what the platforms sort of saw that made the case for, okay, let's make more content.
Yeah, I think that anyone who's watching this and hasn't really been to Mexico or seen Mexican fanaticism for soccer, because you can say English people love soccer. I'll give you a short anecdote. Last World Cup, when it was Father's Day and Mexico beat Germany, on Father's Day, I went out for a walk that afternoon by the river here in New York, and the riverbank was just, they were already going to have, like the Mexican people were already going to have their parties. It was like the most joyous celebration I've ever seen, because it was like the two, they were already all together for Father's Day and they'd spanked Germany, which was unbelievable. So there is this fanaticism that I think doesn't necessarily translate because everyone thinks they're passionate. So I can see what you're saying about creating a show, a local show about such a topic would just really kind of be, you'd feel a lot more identification with that.
And I think the comedy too, like I think in different places, I'm sure you are from, a different country, not in the US. And so I think you'd say like you have, your country has its own comedy. I think every country has like slang and jokes and the writers, like when they're in the room, like those jokes are really, really going to hit with, like you're saying, those local audiences. So I think that's really fascinating to see like the different comedy that comes out of the different shows that are made in other places. And I think people like really relate to it.
Yeah, actually, that's a very good point that you've just mentioned, because there was something I read about Netflix's version of English shows that they produce versus actual English shows. And it's that there's a lot, they don't use anywhere, someone had counted, some academic went through this, and Netflix produced British shows have nowhere near the level of slang that like shows that are written for the British channels and networks have. So I wonder if we'll see that on a larger scale too with other languages. It's kind of more sanitized, right? Like they want the act, like The Crown. Well, you wouldn't hear slang in The Crown, but they want the accent and they want these pieces, but they don't necessarily, they want it to be accessible for everyone. So they might tone down some regional things, which is
interesting.
But then everyone's watching it and they're like, oh my God, there's a British show on Netflix. I love it. And
yes.
Even back home.
I do love the British shows, I have to say. Like, I loved The Crown. I'm a fan. Yes.
Well, you know, we have our good side sometimes. So you're quite passionate, obviously, about what we've been saying about creating content that crosses borders. And you know, like you were saying, could be in multiple places at once. Mm-hmm. On that note, have you found or noticed if US audiences are now more accepting of content that's not in English? And if so, like, what does this change in the market for you?
Oh my gosh, this is a great question. And I think we can all collectively talk about like a show like Squid Game, right? Which came out, or even before Squid Game, there was the film Parasite, which won an Oscar. And I think your question, you know, our audience is more accepting of other content was the question from other places in the US. Yeah, I think, this was sort of a personal story, but when Parasite came out, I believe it was in 2019, it was just like such a phenomenon, and it won an Oscar. And I remember a friend of mine who's, you know, she was maybe in her mid-20s. She said, hey, I went to the movie theater and I saw Parasite. And she said that was the first film that she had seen, like with subtitles, that she had like actively gone to watch a film that was like, and it was kind of crazy to me. But I think maybe, you know, the wave from, I think, South Korea, which is also Squid Game, has proven that sort of universal topics like what was in Parasite, what's in Squid Game, about if it's economy or the way people live, or, you know, people who work really, really hard and what they're able to achieve. I think people just ate it up because it's a universal. And so I think seeing that and how many people viewed Squid Game on Netflix has really allowed audiences to now be open to content from other places. I think also Spain has so many incredible, you know, so much cinema and again, like the premium series. And I think they're having, you know, also reaching global audiences as well. So there's really so much coming from different places that's now hitting, right, with a lot of people.
I always found it interesting about here in America that there was that sort of reticence for some people to engage in titles, you know, watch something that had subtitles. Whereas in England, all right, I'm not necessarily saying that they would put it on 8 p.m. on BBC One, but there were a number of shows when I was growing up and even after I left to come over here that did very well and became remakes of things because they put them on in Danish, for instance, right? Like there was The Bridge, and before that, forgot the name of it, but there was a show on AMC that was set in Seattle for about 3 or 4 years. It was about detectives, and that was based off of a Danish show that had done well in England in the original language. So it was always weird that because you're basically there's so much good content out there. Best example I can give you, I was a trendsetter, right? I watched Infernal Affairs in Korean, or it was either in Korean or it was Hong Kong film. It was one of those. It was, and I loved it. Didn't think anything else of it. I watched it about 2005, 2006. A couple of years later, I watched The Departed. And I'm sitting there the whole way through it, like having the strangest sense of deja vu. I couldn't put my finger on it. And it was only the ending that made me realize it was the same film that had just been remade from the Asian original into English. And it was really weird, but I feel like it's nice that finally mass audiences have become more accepting of content that's out there, because there's so many good stuff. It's not like, you know, America and the UK are the only countries that make amazing content. There's every region has its storytellers, and we're almost unlocking this, just like this wave of content that we could, of quality content that we never would have been able to see before.
Yes, exactly.
So, I guess on that note, do you feel like, is it the Netflix effect that has helped make this possible? Is it the fact that if it could be two things, it could just be the fact that there's choice, but it could also be the fact that a big brand that people trust are putting these these shows in front of people. But is the rise of global streaming helping to change attitudes to non-English based content in regions?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. Maybe asking why now, like you're saying, and is it because of the streaming? And I think it is because now we have, when you look at distribution, we have this new model. We've always had traditional distribution, theatrical distribution, broadcast. And now we have the streaming services, right? And I think because of that, like if you are a streaming platform and you produce a show in, that's like a local production, but then you can immediately distribute it to 190 countries. And I don't think that that's something, to people's living rooms, right? Not just to a theater or to, certain places, but it is into people's living rooms. And so I think that just like at the snap of a finger, people all across the globe can watch the same thing. And then also I think social media is a huge part, because I remember with Squid Game, it was such a topic among like, I think it was like high school students were talking about it, or everyone on Facebook was talking. People were just really, really talking about this phenomenon. And you want to watch it because you're thinking, why is everyone talking about this? And so I think that then leads you to being able to put it on right when you're at home. And so I think for sure it's that new distribution model that can reach so many audiences.
I think you may have just actually stumbled upon, so you should go and do a media degree and write a dissertation on this, because it's actually, I'd never considered the fact that, social media is also global, right? So we have a distribution format like Netflix, it's able to basically go in everyone's homes if you want it. And then you have Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter is available in most countries of the world, other than the ones that have, blocked them on purpose. But you can reach pretty much everyone. And so, you can kind of see popular culture, and also the fact that people do sort of, the borders are smaller now because of social media. So if something picks up in one country and trends, say on TikTok, it will probably move and cross, the world that way. So you can really influence content with that, which is a brilliant point. Thank you for drawing those two things together.
I think so. Well, it's the only thing that makes sense to me, because I'm just thinking, how is it that this is happening? And as someone who wants to create content, right, you have to think about, it's sometimes intimidating because there is so much content, but also and because it's so easy you could how you get it out to the world. But just looking at, why, but it's, I think it all sort of shows like the audiences are there, right? And they just, want incredible stories. And now it's, they can take in the content from wherever it comes from. I also think that the streaming platforms are doing a really great job at working with local talent and really understanding how much that content can come from everywhere, and really going into those places. And I think drawing out the stories that are there. So I think that's another really great thing that's happening.
The talk of social has led my mind down another path, which is age, right? And how younger people consume content. Is there anything that you've noticed with creating scripted in particular that are maybe for the Spanish speaking audiences, and perhaps in Latin America, are they less, what's the word I'm looking for? Over here, everyone in America, right? Younger people just don't tend to watch television anymore. Is that trend happening still, or is it influencing how content is made for younger people in your mind and how you kind of perceive things?
Yeah, I don't think I can, have the final say in that question, but I do think that sort of attention span, or what I think you're just competing more for people's attention span. And so our company, ThinkBIG, actually created a docuseries for Snapchat. I don't think I've ever talked about it. And it was a sports docuseries called The Break. And so that was a really interesting, almost experiment for us to take a really cinematic, high quality piece of content and put it on a vertical platform. And we actually shot vertically. And that's how we distributed it for Snap, because we thought it was quick bites of sort of inspiring sports stories, but it looked beautiful, like a documentary that you would see on HBO or Showtime. And I think it's just looking at what the audiences want. If this does well, we keep going. If not, then maybe we have to keep it on the platform. So I think it's definitely, you're competing for attention span, and there's just so much content that's competing for that. And so just looking at that when you make content, who it's for, and maybe where are you going to put it? And, is it going to reach the right person? For sure.
Well, on that topic, let's talk about VIX. Is it VIX or VIX Plus? I don't know how to say it.
Yes. Okay. So I think that there's going to be both. One is an ad-based and one is a But I'll let you tell everyone what VIX is, I think.
Oh, well, yeah, you've helped me with that bit. Thank you. So VIX.
Yes, so VIX is something I'm not associated with it at all, but it's just something that, of course, I think everyone should look at if you're interested in the Spanish language market. But it is a streaming platform for Spanish language audiences. And there was a merger between two companies, and they launched it. And so I believe it might have come out this month, or it might be coming out soon, but it's going to be ad-based and subscription-based. And it's a streaming platform that's going to have all original content. And it's going to be for, Spanish language audiences. And I think it's
South America, right? Or Latin America, like everywhere from
US, as well. Like it's just for the Spanish language audience. And it's really fascinating, I think, for everyone to really watch. And it's so exciting. Like there's going to be a streaming platform made specifically for this audience. And I know they have, production coming out from Mexico City and different, creators. And so I think it's just going to be fascinating to see how it does. That's what I'm most looking forward to, is like, is there this niche? Can you make a streaming platform for Spanish language audience? And there are other platforms that do exist, I should say that. But this one, I think, will have a large library of content. And I think it's going to be really exciting. And it's just great that like this is what's happening, right?
Yeah.
Right now. And just to see how audiences react, will they subscribe? Do people want a platform that's, just for them, I think.
So it's the two media giants, right, of Univision in America and
Televisa
in Mexico.
Yes.
And they're creating a sort of two continent spanning service that's almost like, I guess you could put in the same echelon as say like a Disney Plus or a Netflix in terms of ambition, right? Like they want to be one of the streaming services across North and South America.
Yes, exactly. And I believe it's, for that Spanish language audience. And both of these companies already have like a library of content. So, and I think in a similar way that, other maybe companies also do. So that'll be really interesting to see. And in addition to what they are going to put on it, that's new and that people haven't seen as well.
I do have, hopes for it, because I feel like that the first thing they did, which is now what has been renamed VIX, right? If VIX Plus is the premium, then Prende TV has become VIX. And Univision launched that just over a year ago in the US, which is a free fast and AVOD service over here. And they had a really great plan. They just added more and more channels every month. They really did a good job of integrating Latino content from different countries, as well as it just, the central service, because Univision always got the Televisa content from Mexico, right? It was more of a Mexican focused kind of channel. In terms of streaming, they had a very strong strategy, and it seems to have rolled up into VIX Plus, which is, I feel like the management there is great, at least with their strategy. So I guess with VIX Plus, there's probably an obvious question, but if there's a new player in town who wants content, does this give you more opportunities as a Latin creator?
Yes. No, I definitely will say yes. The people, I think they need content, right? The platform needs content, which to people that are, writers or that want to create this content, that represents like a whole new market, a new space. Like they are going to need the content. So we need to, and in addition, I think it's really important to work with, like I mentioned earlier, different writers and different creators in order to get their original ideas and stories on places like VIX. And yeah, I think it's like the doors are open, it's all the doors have opened, and they've started to, right? Like but I think this is really special. It'll really be interesting to see how it does. For sure.
It also makes me wonder too, like, does the formation of VIX, does that suggest that there was a need that wasn't being met by the existing streaming services out there?
Yeah, I think for sure the amount of Spanish language audiences that exists, like the numbers are there. And so I think that they know that there's the audience, right? And so I think it's targeting that and seeing how they receive it, for sure.
Well, best of luck to them, because I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yes.
I have a final question for you. What do you think is important when you're developing Spanish language content? Is there anything that you like when you're looking, if you're looking over at scripts or people are making pitches, what kind of do you think is a very important thing to include or catches your eye?
That's a really good question. And I would say developing, but also maybe when anyone takes on a project, like when you produce anything too, I think it's really important for that authenticity to be there. I think two things. One, it's that authenticity, right? So, if it's a story, like I mentioned earlier, if it's a comedy, the people in the writers' rooms, right? Or the writer has to really hit those jokes. Like if it was those characters that were really speaking and in the way that people from that specific place talk or the slang, the time period. So I think with the writing, it has to really be authentic. And I think that's really finding the talent that can create that content to really drive it, right? And really make sure that it really hits with the audience, because I think that's really important, being authentic in every way, like the way it looks and the way that the characters sound, and the stories. And then I also think when you're producing something or developing something, especially in the independent world, if you're maybe producing, I feel like it's important to take on projects that you feel like, this is kind of my rule, but that you feel like you can actually contribute to, or that you kind of have something to bring to the table, and kind of in just in a natural way that you can collaborate with the person who is the screenwriter or maybe the director, and you can really push forward that content. And I see that in a lot of different people, like Ava DuVernay, who did Selma, and she's done some incredible content. I think it's because that person is able to bring sort of them and their perspective to the project and really understands it, and then takes it kind of to the next phase for sure.
Well, I think I will just say before we wrap up, any final words from you that you want to share about either what the whole topic today, like how ThinkBIG is going to grow, anything is.
Yeah, I don't know. This was really fun. I think I'm just excited, like we talked about, how far we've come in 5 years, and the audiences that definitely love this content. And so I'm just really excited to see what's going to come next, I think.
Yeah, the next 5 years will be very interesting. I think
yes, everything's changing so quickly that it's sometimes hard to keep up with it. But
yeah, definitely. But
predicting
10 years down the line,
what's next, that's a tough job.
The good thing about that is you can never be wrong, because all you say is, "Oh, well, something changed I hadn't thought of, so my prediction is out." I guarantee you, predicting the future is the best thing in the world, because it's never your fault if you get it wrong.
There you go. Exactly.
That's my hint as a media analyst. Oh, I probably.
There you go.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today. That was a really interesting discussion, and I actually think it would be very interesting to people who have listened to, because may not have had a understanding of the Spanish speaking markets, as well as sort of just creating content that can go across different areas. So thank you very much for joining us, Valeria.
Yes, thank you so much. And thanks to the festival as well. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.